the town of Sturbridge, and I'm happy that you're able to join us for this presentation tonight. This presentation is being broadcast on our public access channel, and I would like to thank our friends in the public access department for their willingness to record this and broadcast this meeting. This presentation is being held during a tornado watch here in the town of Sturbridge. So unfortunately, we have the bad luck of having a tornado watch during what I consider to be an important presentation, but we're still blessed to be having so many important town officials here this evening. With me here today is our building inspector, Nelson Burlingame, our town planner, Gene Bouban, Selectman Michael Supernat, and Selectman Chase Kavinsky, member of our planning board, Russell Chamberlain, the chairman of our finance committee, Kathy Neal. I want to thank you all for being in attendance here today. And I also especially want to thank Jim Barry, who is one of the regional coordinators for the stretch code implementation here in Massachusetts, who was able to deal with the weather and get here, and I appreciate you coming out today. One of the things that the Board of Selectmen has asked myself and Gene and Nelson to work on this year was an application for the Green Communities designation. And this is going to be spoken about in greater detail by our friend Mr. Barry in just a moment. But essentially what that would do is help provide the town of Sturbridge resources by being designated as a green community. And there are certain criteria that comes with being a green community, the benefits of which are going to be in excess of probably $150,000 in revenues to the town on a one-time basis, and competitive grants for green communities moving forward to help us deal with energy efficiency issues here in the town of Sturbridge, saving us money on our capital side, but also potentially saving monies in our operations as well. One of the provisions of the green communities is the adoption of the stretch code. For those of you who have been in the town for many years, you may remember that this came up probably several years ago. Things have changed a little bit with the current building code, and it's not as different as what the current stretch code calls for. But I'm going to let Mr. Barry explain these in greater detail. I'm going to call him up, and he's going to make a presentation. For those of you who are watching at home, this presentation is going to be rebroadcast over the next several weeks as we approach town meeting, because this article is going to be one of the articles to be voted on at the annual town meeting on June 4th. Without further ado, Mr. Barry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. What a crowd, what a crowd. So, I'm Jim Barry. I work for the Department of Energy Resources. I like to put the chain of command up there so you can see where I fit in the chain of command, about as low to the bottom of the pole as you can get. So if you have any questions that start with the word, why did those folks, I probably can't answer that because I wasn't one of the folks that created it. I'm one of those folks that helped explain it. And it started back in 2009 when I was a selectman in Belchertown, and I heard about the Green Communities program had been created, and I heard that if you jump through some hoops, you could get some money to do energy efficiency projects in town. And we had a number of old school buildings that had unit ventilators underneath every single window in every single school that all needed work. And we were in the process of replacing and repairing a few each year because that's all we could afford. So I said, well, if we become a green community and we get some money, can we replace them all and get it done with? And the answer was yes, you can. So, selectmen, I volunteered to find out more about the 5 hoops to see how difficult would it be to become a green community. Be careful what you volunteer for as a selectman, because not only did I learn about it and decide that we should go forward, the state hired me to go from town to town and explain this process to others. So I'm one of 4 regional coordinators or circuit riders in the 4 regions of the state, and my job is to go Hamden, Hampshire, Franklin, Berkshire County, talk to boards of selectmen, talk to planning boards, talk to energy committees, and say, here's what your options are. If you want to do it, I'll help you through the process. I'll help explain it. I'll answer the questions. You may or may not want to go forward. That's fine with us. It's completely voluntary, but if you decide to go forward, there is money at the end of the rainbow. So the Green Communities Designation Grant Program was created by legislation in the Green Communities Act of 2008. That legislation had a whole bunch of stuff in it, mostly related to solar, greenhouse gas emissions, incentives, but it created a Green Communities Designation Division within the Department of Energy Resources, a brand new division whose only function is to act as a liaison between municipalities and the state for all things energy related. So I answer questions about solar, I answer questions about wind, I answer questions about energy efficiency. Primarily, I answer questions about the designation grant program because, as I say, there's money available. Our budget is $20 million a year in grants. It comes from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI. As you may or may not know, Massachusetts is one of 9 states that requires people who produce electricity, not National Grid and Eversource that deliver, but people who actually burn oil or burn propane and make electricity, they're required to pay for stuff that goes in the air above a certain level. So it's a cap and trade program that does exist. Those people who make electricity have to pay into this fund. So of course, if someone is making electricity and paying more for overhead, literally, I guess overhead, then of course that's buried into the cost of the electrons they sell to National Grid and Eversource. So all of us who pay an electric bill are in fact paying into this. It's not part of the standard budget in Boston. So if the governor said, I need more money for the state police, can't let me take it out of green communities, you can't readily do that. It would take an act of legislation to change where this money is allocated from and to. So we're relatively secure in our funding source. When we started in 2008, there was $10 million set aside a year. When the administration changed from Governor Patrick to Governor Baker, there was some question about, will this program even continue? Turns out that not only did they like the program, they decided to double our funding because it was so successful. So there are five criteria you have to meet. I call them, as a former selectman, a very skeptical former selectman. There's 5 hoops you got to jump through. I'm going to describe those hoops gently, carefully. Are we set with criteria 1?
1 and 2.
1 and 2 are completely done. So 1 and 2 talks about being a little bit more business friendly. I used to say the problem with Massachusetts with regards to business, and then someone says, wait a minute. If you're working for the state, you can't say the problem with Massachusetts. You have to say the challenge in Massachusetts for new businesses is, where do I go with a new business? There's 351 municipalities, each with their own zoning laws, which means each has their own rules and regulations about what you can do where and what the permitting process is. And so it's confusing and difficult for many businesses to figure out, where would I go? I don't want to spend a lot of time and energy fighting a zoning board. I don't want to figure out the permitting process. So criteria 1 and 2 says, somewhere in town in your zoning, not everywhere in town, some of this energy stuff, renewable energy stuff, has to be allowed by right rather than by special permit. And the reason for that is the special permitting process, as you may know, allows for the special permitting granting authority to say, nah, it doesn't fit with the character of the neighborhood, so we're going to say no. So what we're looking for is someplace in town for one of these kinds of activities to happen without that process. And you are using a solar bylaw, probably?
We have a solar bylaw, and then also the manufacturing would be allowed in any of our industrial areas.
So you already met criteria 1 and 2 without a problem? Criteria 3 is something, when I first heard about it, I said, well, we should ought to be doing that anyway. Criteria 3 says we need to, as a municipality, understand where we spend our money on energy. So what's the electric bill in each of our town buildings? What's the oil bill in each of our town buildings? What's the propane bill? Let's figure out how much energy we use in our municipal buildings and add it all up, get our arms wrapped around it, see what it is, and then come up with a plan to reduce that by 20% over 5 years. You're not required to fund that plan. You're not required to go to town meeting and ask for a 5-year commitment to funds. You're asked to get a to-do list, and if you had money, would you change out some LED lights? Would you add more insulation to a police station? Would you add maybe better garage doors in a DPW garage? And you do that by having your utility and or others go through the buildings and make a list of things you wished you could do that would save energy. So from the state's viewpoint, we're saving kilowatt hours or MMBTUs. From your point of view, if I'm using less kilowatts, I'm paying less for electricity, so taxpayer dollars are not going to a high electric bill. You're not going to save so much money, you're going to hire 35 new school teachers, but your money that you've been spending on electricity or oil will be a smaller number, and maybe that difference can be used for salt or sand. Criteria 4 is similar to criteria 3. It talks about being energy efficiency in the town. It refers specifically to vehicles. It says, as a town, new vehicles be energy efficient vehicles. We do not require you to put a snowplow in a Prius. We do not require a snowplow in a Prius. The ruling is you get fuel efficient vehicles where practicable and available. So big DPW trucks are exempt from that because they don't make energy efficient DPW trucks. Fire trucks are exempt. Police vehicles are exempt. The things that are not exempt is those sedans that we may have in town that certain people use. If you were to replace those in the future, you'd need to meet certain miles per gallon requirements. And then the fifth criteria, the fifth hoop you got to jump through, is to make sure that new buildings in town are more energy efficient than standard. When that was first proposed, the question was, how the heck are we going to do that? How can you make sure that new buildings are more energy efficient than otherwise? Turns out that the only really way you can control buildings is through the building code. It turns out that the building code, in terms of energy, evolves over time, and they were in the process of moving from the 2006 code to the 2009 code. They're looking forward to 2012 code. So the building code changes over time. So what they said was, we will allow you to adopt a more energy efficient appendix of the building code that is a bit of a stretch to get there, and if you adopt that, then you meet criteria 5. We're open to listen to if someone has another idea on how to meet criteria 5 without doing a stretch code, but in the 8 years we've been doing this, no one's come up with a way to guarantee that a new house is more energy efficient. When we first started, we said, okay, who's going to do this besides Cambridge and Amherst? Turns out that quite a few people are willing to go through it, so there are now 210 green communities throughout the state, east to west, north to south. The ones that are in bright green are the most recent 25 that happened last December. So once a year we invite applications in to participate. Almost everybody who applies makes it, because part of my job is to help you through the hoops, figure out what the paperwork is, have your local RPA, Regional Planning Agency, CMRPC, who's probably helping you folks. So we offered the CMRPC some grant funds to help pay for them to spend time in your town to help you with primarily criteria 3, which is currently a difficult one to get your arms around. So there's 25 new green communities. The stretch code, I want to remind you, when I was here in April, this number was 217 municipalities. Today it's 230. Actually, it's 233 because last night Wilbraham said yes. I was there for their town meeting. And last Saturday, both Rutland and Heath said yes. I was in Heath Saturday morning and I was in Rutland Saturday evening. So people are coming towards us again. Many towns that said no thank you many years ago are starting to rethink it, and you're going to see why in about 2 or 3 slides. But again, this is no longer a strange, bizarre thing that no one is going to handle. Quite a few people are actually doing it. So criteria 5 says new residential construction and new commercial construction has to minimize, to the extent feasible, the life cycle costs of the facility by utilizing energy efficiency, water conservation, and other renewable or alternative energy technologies. That's what's in the statute that created this. So that's what we're trying to get to. And so we have found that if you adopt the stretch code, which is an alternative piece of the building code, then you will in fact meet criteria 5. So what is it? Not only was I on the member of the Board of Selectmen, but prior to that I was crazy enough to be on the planning board. And in those days in Belchertown we were doing 80 new houses a year. First time it happened I said, holy mackerel. The second time it happened I said, holy, where are we going to put the school? New subdivisions were going in, and I got pretty familiar with some of the builders in town, and so I said, this stretch code is going to cause some angst, some heartache, perhaps. So we sent to everybody who had pulled a building permit in the previous 5 years, a postcard saying, we're going to meet, come on in, we're going to talk about this. I'll tell you what little I know. Please ask me 100 questions, and we'll go get some answers and come back for it. So some of the misconceptions, some of the fears, some of the worries early on included, well, the stretch code is new and experimental. How are people going to be able to deal with this? Turns out it is not new and experimental. It's based on something that already existed, namely Energy Star for Homes. So you're familiar with Energy Star appliances. There has been an Energy Star for Homes program for a large number of years. It's a federal program that says if you build an energy efficient home, we will offer you cash incentives. If it is even more energy efficient, we'll give you even more money. But in the way they prove that it's energy efficient, I'll get into detail in a little bit, it's called getting a HERS rating, a HERS score. So that process was already in existence, and the stretch code makes use of that process, which surprised me because often a new state program creates a new state program, which creates new. They actually piggybacked on when it was already in existence. There were builders who were familiar with the program. There were HERS raters already there who knew how to do it. So it's not new and experimental. It's not bizarre. Another concern is the stretch code might require tight, unhealthy homes. And this leads from, if you're going to make a house that's more energy efficient, which means you're trying to keep the heat in, you don't want it to go out the walls, you're probably going to build it tighter, and it might very well be too tight. It could be airtight. It could be a sick house syndrome. Well, I'm old enough to remember in the 70s when there was an oil crisis and an oil embargo, and you could only buy gasoline on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday if your license plate ended in an odd number, and Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday if your license plate ended in an even number, because they shut off the oil spigots. I know none of you are old enough to remember that, but it did happen. And many people decided we're going to try to do something different about our oil consumption. So Washington came up with the Energy Star for Homes program eventually. Many builders said, well, I know, I'll just put plastic under the sheetrock, and that'll keep the wind out. Well, in some cases, that results in mold and mildew and a sick house syndrome. Well, in the intervening years, 20, 30, 40 years, different materials have been invented so you can have an airtight house that is not sick. We've had different building techniques. That means you can have an energy efficient home that is not sick. We have been doing this for 8 years now. No one has built a house that has resulted in a sick home. So although it was a fair concern early on, well, if you make a tight house, it's going to be sick. Well, it turns out it is not. Another concern, especially up where I live, where we do not have natural gas, most of our homes are heated with oil heat. The concern was, well, an oil-heated home might not meet the stretch code because, again, we're trying to become as energy efficient as possible. We're going to measure how much energy we're using, and an oil burner uses more energy than a similar natural gas furnace or a propane furnace. It's easy to get a high-efficient gas or propane boiler. It's difficult to get a high-efficient oil burner. So if you have an 87% efficient oil burner, that means $13 out of 100 is going up the chimney. Yes, you can meet the stretch code by getting a better oil furnace, but it's not easy. It's easier to get it with natural gas or propane, but it is not impossible to do it with oil. But it was a fair concern early on. The last one really made some people out in my neck of the woods nervous because we don't have public sewers, we have private septic tanks, and Title V says if you're going to sell your home, you have to make sure that it meets the current regulations for septic systems, and if it does not, you must fix it before you can sell it. You can't give the buyer a discount on the price and say, you fix it when you move in. No, it's got to be fixed before you go. So many people with that in mind said, if we pass a stretch code, are we going to be required to make our homes energy efficient before we sell it? The answer is no, that's never been the case. It's a fair worry. It's a fair concern if you think about what the state has done on some other things. But this particular building code and the stretch code does not require you to retrofit existing homes. It only applies to new residential construction and new commercial construction. By the way, I'm happy to be interrupted at any time. If there's questions you want to ask me, I'm easily interrupted. So what we say today is the stretch code is no longer much of a stretch. That's why many towns that said no in the past have started to do it over, rethink it. 8 or 9 years ago, the stretch code was a bit of a stretch. When it was compared to the previous building code, the 2009 International Energy Code Conference, IECC 2009, when you compare the first version of the stretch code with the original building code in 2009, 2010, it was a bit of a stretch. In the past, you could use 2x4 construction and insulation. Today, In 2014, the building code evolved, the building code was revised, it requires more insulation, better windows, better heating systems. So now, homes built in your town in the last 3.5, 4 years have been built almost to the stretch code standard. You have 2x6 walls and much more insulation than you used to be able to do. You have to have slightly better windows than you used to be able to do. You have to have better heating systems than you used to be able to. We say that the base code caught up with the stretch code, and some builders said it was actually easier. So I don't want to belabor this point much, but the standard building code today, and has been for a while, has 2 compliance paths. There's a prescriptive compliance path and a performance compliance path. What the heck is he talking about? So the prescriptive path says just follow the rules. The rules say R19 in the walls, R49 in the ceilings. The building inspector can look at it and say yes. The building inspector makes sure that it's done well. Both sides of the insulation have to be touching, the top and bottom. You follow the prescription and it gets inspected. With the performance path, we look at holistically at the whole house and say, how is the house measured in terms of energy usage? And you're allowed to do some trade-offs on energy or windows or heating systems to get to a certain energy efficiency level. So some builders who were concerned about R49 in the attic, and they had some odd-shaped roofs, and were having trouble thinking about how am I going to get R49 everywhere, if they used a performance path, they could use this ability to swap out one option for another option to still meet the building code. Not everyone, but some did. But in January of 2017, both the standard building code and the stretch code both evolved one more time. There's almost no stretch at all between the two in terms of the building techniques, the equipment that has to be used. The basic difference between the stretch code and the non-stretch code is a requirement of having one more person in the loop, a home energy rating services energy expert who's going to be involved in the process of building your home and is going to ensure that it's designed well, inspected as it goes along well, and in final inspection. Yes, it's going to cost more money to find this person to do the work, but there are mass save rebates that help cover the cost of that. In terms of what is it we're really talking about, we're not talking about everything in the house. We're not talking about the electrical stuff. We're not talking about the plumbing stuff. We're talking about those aspects of the house that relate to energy. So it's insulation, doors, windows, mechanicals. These are the list of things that we're trying to narrow in on and see if we can save energy for the homeowner. So I talked a little bit about, as part of the BBRS stretch code, as part of the mass building code, there's a similar process to the Energy Star for Homes process. Training for building officials has been done. There's free training every year that they can get to find out. Not only when this building code changes and know what the standard building code is, they also get training on the new stretch code. And this is what I mentioned before. It provides for performance testing rather than prescriptive measures only. And why test for performance? It is possible that if you follow a prescription, you still might not have a great job done. So if you hire my son home from college to staple up some insulation, he might not do a great job. With a performance test, we're going to make sure that A, it's inspected well, both by the building inspector and the HERS inspector, but we're also going to measure how well it's done at the end of the day with some testing. And if it's not done well, small gaps, small holes in the wall. So if you got an outside outlet on your deck and there's a hole in the wall, that really needs to be sealed well, otherwise a small hole can lead to a lot of energy being put out. So the process is called a Home Energy Rating Services Rating System, HERS. We're going to analyze the annual usage of heating, cooling, water heating, lighting, appliances, and include on-site generation where applicable. If someone has solar PV, we're going to count that as a positive. You're not required to have it. Some people choose to have it. We're going to look at how a home is built compared to a standard reference home. So standard reference home is one built to the 2006 building code. We're going to try to do better than that. We're going to try to see how much better we can get than that. So when we say a HERS, so every point better than the older version is 1% change in consumption. So if we get a 1% reduction in energy, then we drop this thermometer a little bit. So if we say HERS 55, that means it's 45% more efficient than a similar home built to the old code. And the way it's done is by hiring a HERS rater. And again, in the beginning, there was some fears about, are there enough of them? Who are these people? Well, they were some around because they were Energy Star for homes. It's the same process. And early on, there was a few. Today, there's a lot more because there's so many more towns that have the stretch code. A lot more people need a HERS rater. More HERS people have been created? No. More people have chosen to become HERS raters and have a job. So the idea is, if you're going to build a new home, and you're going to follow the performance path, either in a stretch code town or not. You could follow the performance path in your town without adopting a stretch code. That's always been an option, the performance path or the prescriptive path. If you adopt a stretch code, you can only use the performance path. So it starts with the builder has an electrical subcontractor, and a plumbing subcontractor, and an insulation subcontractor. Now he's got to hire an energy subcontractor. One more person to hire, one more person to find, one more person to pay. The builder would go to that HERS rater with the plan of the house he wants to build. I shouldn't be saying he all the time, but I do. You're going to sit there in front of a computer and say, well, how big a house is it? It's 2,000 square feet. 1 story or 2 story? It's 2 stories. Is it facing north or south? Well, actually, it's facing southeast. What kind of windows are you planning on using? Well, I'm going to use Anderson version model number blah, blah, blah. How much what insulate? They're plugging this information into a computer model of the kind of features of the house that are related to energy. And the computer is comparing it to what you would have been required to do with the old building code and starts measuring how much better you are than the old building code. So this thermometer starts dropping. When you say, I'm going to use 2x6s instead of 2x4s, I'm going to fill those with insulation, well, that thermometer drops. When you say, I'm going to use high-quality windows, the thermometer is going to drop again. So the builders and the HERS rater talk about the different features of the house and how to get that number down to 55 with using a variety of methods. They can pick and choose from this menu of options. So the process is, it starts with computer modeling. A piece of paper falls out of the computer, says, here's the house we expect to build. You take that to the building inspector to get your building permit so that he knows what you're going to be building. When the house is being built, in the process of being built, the HERS inspector comes out a couple times and looks at it. They look at it before the sheetrock goes up. They look at the air sealing all around. They look at the kind of windows you're doing. How well are the windows sealed well, so we don't have leaks around there. Duct tightness, if we have ducts moving hot air or cold air, we want to make sure that they're sealed well and tested. So there's a blower door test. This gentleman on the picture is doing a blower door test. You'll notice that everything is painted. The house is completely finished. This is one of the last tests they do. You don't want to fail this test. What they do is they close all the doors and windows. They put this device in the door. They put the house under pressure, and they measure how much air is going out when the house is under pressure, which means it's leaking from somewhere, right? And of course it's going to be leaking from somewhere, because it's impossible to make it completely airtight, but we're trying to make sure that it's not too leaky. So we're measuring air changes per hour to see how leaky is it. Turns out early on, this was a big head scratcher for many builders, like what? And if I don't pass, I don't get my certificate of occupancy? Sorry. So they want to start checking it for air tightness before they get all done painting, because if you find a leak, you want to be able to fix it before it's all painted. This was a big concern. In 2009, 2010, 2011, people are saying, you know what? This is a bit too far for us. We're not ready to say yes to the stretch code. But in 2014, when that standard building code evolved and changed and almost caught up with the stretch code, this became a requirement in 2014. So whether you're a stretch code town or not a stretch code town, this is happening today. And you don't get a certificate of occupancy if it's too leaky. That happens today. And the stretch code does not require it to be more airtight than the standard building code. 3 air changes per hour is allowed in either case. So again, what had been a fairly major concern and roadblock to builders and therefore townspeople to vote on it has been removed, not because the stretch code's easier, but because the standard building code got a bit more stringent, more difficult, I'm not sure what the right word is. So there's testing that goes on, and then there's a final analysis. So the builders, the HERS rater is going to look to see, did you put in the windows you said you're going to put in? Yeah, I did. Oh, wait a minute, we changed out these 2 windows and put in one. So they may make adjustments to the plan that they used originally, but they're still going to get a score on the whole house as built. A piece of paper falls out of the computer again that we can hand to the building inspector and say, here's the house that we built, here's the score. I verify as a HERS inspector that this house really is energy efficient. And that really is the nuts and bolts of it. What you're doing is you're getting someone else involved in helping design the house and inspect the details of the energy consumption and testing it, who's not involved in the building trades. So it's not the builder's brother-in-law. It's someone who only does HERS testing. So the consumer is getting like an MPG rating for the house. This HERS score is like an MPG rating done by someone else, and so you can use that when you sell your house, right? So if you're selling a house and you're selling a house, I've got a HERS 55. Yeah, well, I got a HERS 40. Well, the houses look similar, but this one's going to be more energy efficient. I may save more money per year on this one, so maybe I'll lean that way. Like MPGs in a car. Now, I tell people when I bought my first car, all I cared about was horsepower. When my son bought his car, he cared about miles per gallon, as well as does it move right along. But our younger people are smarter than me anyway. So, prove it to me, Jim. What are the real numbers? You say it's not much difference. What's the cost? Is this really going to cost more? So, as you may or may not know, Governor Baker requires, when there's new regulations coming through, that there's a cost analysis done prior to it being promulgated. I'm not sure if the previous governor required it. We had done some cost-benefit analysis in the previous administration, but this one we had to redo the analysis because the standard building code had changed. So we redid the analysis. This is a 2-page analysis I'm going to show you. This first page is a summary page that shows it's going to cost more money to build a home, but there's some rebates and there's some net dollars. I want to first show you where the extra cost comes from. So this is the second page of a 2-page process. This column is the features of the house that relate to energy. This is what you would normally do to meet the standard building code as it exists today. Here's the things you would do to make it slightly better, a bit of a stretch, so you could meet the stretch code, and here's the extra costs. So the analysis is based on a 2,550 square foot home. Turns out that's the average size of new homes in Massachusetts. That's bigger than I need. I don't know who's that. But that's what we use, the average size home that people are building. In the Worcester area, we use that in terms of costs rather than the Boston area, which is a lot more money, or someplace out west, which is less money. So the first thing we're going to notice here is the HERS rating. In order to hire someone to do this HERS score thing, we have to hire that HERS person, and it's going to cost us an extra $500. Now, 3 or 4 years ago, you had to have a blower door test, but you could have your brother-in-law buy a blower door and do the testing and give you a score. As of January of 2017, now the blower door test has to be done by someone who's certified as a blower door test person. That's generally a HERS person. So the builder has to find one of these people anyway, but to get that person involved in the preliminary modeling and the inspections, as well as final inspection, is another $500. Windows, typically people use 0.3 for the U value. They need slightly better windows, so the lower number, the better the insulation value is, and that costs an extra $500. The heating system, and I'm looking at a propane heated house because that's often what we see today. 92% efficient propane burner is a pretty good burner, but you can get a 96% propane furnace for another $300, and that drops that thermometer again. So, right, so the goal is to get that thermometer to go down. So we're going to add slightly better windows. We're going to use a slightly better furnace. We're going to pay more money for it. The cooling system, we're going to pay a little bit better. We're going to get a slightly more efficient cooling system and spend $400 more. Domestic hot water. We spend more time and energy, literally, to get hot water for a shower. My wife says, just spend the money, you need a shower, don't be worried about it. But in order to get that efficiency up, or efficiency down, in order to get the HERS score down, which means the efficiency is up, they went from a propane tank gallon heater to a tankless propane heater $700. So they were able to drop that thermometer by using a more efficient system, but they spent some money on it. Similarly, they were checking duct leakage to the outside. You don't want the hot air and or the cold air in your ducts to get out. So they spent another $200 to make sure that the leakage tests had a better score. The total extra cost to build this house to meet the stretch code compared to just meeting the standard code was $2,600. Notice that we did not change how tight the house is. The air infiltration stayed at 3 air changes per hour. The foundation insulation, the floor insulation, the wall insulation, they didn't add anything extra. It was the same kind of building techniques they've been used to. They were using these same construction materials. No change was required for the stretch code. But these changes add up to $2,600, so, whoop. That's where this number comes from. So the builder had an extra $2,606 to meet the stretch code, but the savings was $1,626 based on MMBTU savings and gallons of oil and therms. So the net cost for this builder, for this house, is about $1,000. If you had a $300,000 house, is he going to sell it for $301,000? Builders choose selling prices based on a variety of things, not necessarily the sum of the stuff that goes into it. But let's say, for instance, that it cost an extra $1,000. They added $1,000 to the sale price. The home buyer at 10% down payment is going to pay an extra $98. If you put the extra $1,000 on a mortgage, a 30-year mortgage at 10% down and 4% APR, your annual mortgage payment would be an extra $77 a year to cover that $1,000. But the savings, the estimated reduction in energy savings, is $475. So this is the utility rebates that you get from Mass Save for doing these kinds of efforts. And these are the ongoing year after year after year savings in your oil bill, your electric bill, your propane bill, your energy costs. So you have a positive cash flow year 1, positive cash flow year 2, 3, 4, 5, and if the price of fuel goes up, you're saving even more. So yes, it costs a little bit more. It didn't take any more effort to do it because we're just replacing equipment with better equipment. We do have an analysis for oil heat because some people, do we have natural gas in this town? No. Okay. So you can use oil heat if you wish. We're going to see a larger cost to meet the stretch code with oil heat, and I'm going to show you this to page 2 for the oil heat. We're going to have a similar scenario where the HERS person is an extra $500. The windows are slightly better, so that's an extra $500. The heating system, so the standard heating system that you go down to the big box and put in the house, is about 83% efficient, which means $17 out of 100 is going up the chimney. And that thermometer on the HERS score, it ain't moving. But if you get a much better oil furnace, that thermometer can come down, you're saving money, only $4 is going up the chimney, but it costs you almost $2,000 for those oil furnace. And you're not going to get on the big box and get them. They're not, I mean, you can get them, but they're not. That's why most new builders are using propane, because it's easier. They can skip a masonry chimney with a high efficient propane boiler. You don't need a masonry chimney, so you're saving money that way. But we didn't add that in there. So here's the extra cost for the oil burner, the cooling system, the domestic hot water system, duct leakage. So this is a $4,000 extra cost to build an oil heated home to stretch code. So that's where that $4,000 number comes from. The rebates from the Mass Save program for these high efficiency equipment is $1,600, but you still have a $2,400 extra cost to build this house, which is an extra $192 a year in your mortgage if you just add that to the mortgage. But you're saving quite a bit of money per year because that oil burner is so much better. So you're going to save more than you're paying year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. So even using an oil burner, you can meet the stretch code. It costs a bit more, but the payback is pretty quick. We also have cost benefits for air source heat pumps. There's a calculation for how to get the incentives. There is a commercial aspect to stretch code. I'm not sure how much new commercial building we do in town, If you have something over 100,000 square foot, a new commercial building of over 100,000, that's a pretty big building, then it would have to meet the stretch code. Most towns are not seeing that kind of growth. Boston probably is, but I'm not sure we are out here. Additions, renovations, and repairs to existing commercial buildings are exempt. Additions, renovations, and repairs to existing residential homes are exempt from the stretch code. There is some documentation that has to be done before and after that the building inspector will be collecting. Again, here's that map of all the towns have done. I don't know where I am actually. I think you have some neighbors that have done it. The summary is that based on 2017, January of 2017, when things changed, we start saying the stretch code is really no longer much of a stretch. Not because it got easier, but because the base code got more energy efficient. The base code caught up to it. You do need a HERS rater involvement. You do need better equipment, but the extra costs, the Mass Save residential new construction program pays for most of that. Additions, renovations, and repairs to existing residential homes, existing commercial homes are exempt from the stretch code. I guess that's it. I thought there was one more. Oh, I thought you had a map of your local people. I guess not. It's on the back of the handout. I don't know if you have it. Now, I'll just read it for the camera audience. Of course, I have to find my glasses before I do that. So some of your neighboring towns that have become green communities and received money include Brimfield, who became a green community in 2017. They received $134,000. Charlton, 2017, got $166,000. Holland has received a couple of grants. They became a green community in 2011. So they've received $293,000. Warren has received $157,000. In addition to getting, so everybody gets a grant when they become designated. I think we've calculated yours, the first one would be $140,000. Once you spend that, probably on items that were discovered in that 5-year plan you're going to make, because you're going to look at all your buildings and say, where could we save money if we had the money on equipment? You're probably going to spend your grant money on that plan. Once it's all spent, once a year you're allowed to apply for more money, up to $250,000 per year to apply for more money. We have on our website a list of all the towns that have become green communities, what they've received, what they've spent it on. Some towns have come in multiple times. Some of the big cities that have full staff, they can say, take the money, go do some project. Next year, go get some more money, do some more project. Small towns out in my area, every 3 years, if you're lucky, you can get a project done and ask for more money. But some towns have come in fairly often and received over $1 million for energy efficient projects. In my town, we spent it again primarily on the schools that had old heating systems. We were able to upgrade not only the equipment, but the controls over the equipment. So instead of them being pneumatic valves, they're digital valves, and they're controlled by computer. So if it's a snowy day, the janitor can stay home in his pajamas and tell the building, pretend it's Sunday, and shut everything down, and not even go in. So we're not using oil and electricity on a Tuesday snow day. So it's been pretty successful, and I'm happy to take whatever questions you'd like to throw at me. Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming out and doing a great job with the presentation, and I appreciate it. I have a couple of questions. The first is, if we have a district school like Tantascwa, how does that work with?
Yep.
If we have a district school like Tantascwa, how would that work with the funding if we wanted to go towards that?
There's a time delay over there. Thank you. So the idea about regional school districts, we have a lot of them out west. You have a choice when you apply for designation. So when you apply for designation, you're going to tell us every one of your buildings by name. You're going to tell us how much electricity they use, how much oil they use. We're going to make a portfolio of your buildings and the energy usage, and we're going to try to reduce that total by 20% over time, right? All of your municipal-owned buildings have to be on that list, so town hall, police station, fire station. Your schools that you own are on that list. Regional schools, you have a choice on. In some towns, they have a regional school that runs the elementary school that happens to be in town, which is really ours, so we're going to claim it because we're going to want to spend money on that school building. We send our kids out to another town, to a big regional high school. We pay 37% of the budget based on the math that we do together. You can choose to include that regional school in your initial portfolio of schools. Some towns choose not to. They say we're going to spend our money on our buildings that we control right away, because if I spend $100,000 of a grant on a boiler in another school and saves $1,000 worth of oil, I'm really only collecting $37 out of that $1,000 I saved, because I'm paying 37%. So some towns don't do it, and you're allowed to choose it. Some towns that did this early on in the process, I have it, Warwick and Northfield and one other town share a common school, and this year they decided, after they took care of their own town, they added the regional school into their portfolio. Their goals now went up because I've got a bigger school with more energy usage, so now my 20% goal is a little bit higher. But they're now going to spend competitive grants, the grants that you're eligible for in the future, on the school system. So the short story is you can choose to include it or not originally. If you choose not to in the original, you can add it later when you decide to do it. I have two towns that share one school. They're both green communities, but they came in at like 3 years different. So when the second town came in, they got the original grant for just their own buildings, and then a couple of years later, both towns added that shared school to their portfolio, and both towns came in for money to spend on that shared school.
Also, I have another question. If you build a home under the stretch energy code, and the additions for homes that are already built, I understand they're withstanding. Say, they build a home, they have a couple more kids, they want a little addition on that house. They go to put an addition on the stretch energy code, or if the expensive furnace that they buy, if that breaks 4 or 5 years down the road and they go to replace it, is there someone that's going to monitor this with these stretch energy homes? Are they going to have to go through the process again? And who's responsible for that?
So any additions to your home are going to go through the building inspector, right? You're going to pull the building permit, right? The building inspector will tell you, you do not need to meet the stretch code for an addition to your home. Now, if the house was basically burnt down, you're starting from scratch, he's probably going to say that's new construction. If you're putting an addition on, he's going to say you can ignore the stretch code. If you put a new boiler in, it has nothing to do with the stretch code. The stretch code impacts new residential construction that gets you that score. Now, some people, and this relates more to Energy Star for Homes people in the past, I haven't seen it really in the HERS stretch code universe yet, but it may have happened. Some people who built an energy efficient home and got a nice score, and then they add an addition to it, they might choose to get the whole house rescored so they can keep that score because they want to walk around. I've got a 455. What do you got? But it's not a requirement for construction. And again, the enforcement is through the building inspector.
Okay. Last question for me. The money, it's coming from, I know you touched on it, the RGGI, which basically it's all companies that make electricity, they put it into a fund, and then it's distributed from that. It's not state funded, though, per se, correct?
Correct, yep.
Okay, that's my last question. All right, thank you.
Can you speak to modular homes? How does this
Yeah.
work with modular homes?
Thank
Is there a list of qualified manufacturers, or how does this work with them?
Yeah, this is something I just found out about a month ago. This calendar year, we're in May already? I guess it was more than a month ago. Modular homes are regulated by federal building inspections and building codes. They're exempt from the state code. Now, when they deliver a modular home in pieces and install it on site, the building inspector is going to check the foundation, make sure it's solid, and going to check for airtightness because the standard building code requires a test for airtightness and a blower door test. But it doesn't really meet the HERS process in the HERS score. The modular home and mobile homes are exempt from the standard state building code.
So people will still be able to put up a modular home? even though
Yes,
they're exempt?
yes, modular homes are still allowed.
If we're a stretch code town?
Yes, if you become a stretch code town, it does not make modular homes easier or harder. Basically doesn't change, right?
The state has a director of modular homes, but right now state either. We have nothing right now.
One more. Wood burning chimneys, like fireplaces in a house, how difficult is it to get to pass this HERS rating, having a fireplace and having that look? In Sturbridge, we have a lot of colonial homes,
Sure.
a lot of fireplaces. How difficult is it to pass?
So the standard building code that evolved over time said if you have a combustion, you have to bring outside air into it, and that doesn't change with the stretch code. The stretch code does not make it more difficult to have that feature. It doesn't make it easier to make that feature. It's basically no different from a non-stretch code town and a stretch code town for a fireplace, wood-burning stove, no difference. Not to say it's as easy as it used to be in 2006, because
It
it's
also has to have a gasket and a jam pump. That's in the original code.
So the short answer is it doesn't get more difficult or easier with the stretch code. The base code is pretty definitive about air tightness, air flow. The stretch code is not worse. It used to be, because the base code used to be less stringent.
Thank you.
I think that's why more people are starting to revisit this concept and saying yes to it, because it's not quite so much of a stretch, and there is money available to the town, and therefore townspeople's money, instead of spending all that money on electric. So think about I don't know what your town budget is like, but think about how much your town budget is for energy in all of your buildings in a fiscal year, and think about if that was reduced by 20%. That's a pretty good number. You're not going to get there year one. Don't let me, the first grant you get is not going to be enough to reduce your energy by 20%. But it's going to get you on a path there, and you can, year after year, ask for more money and keep on going down that path. Someone has, I'll give you some of the questions you didn't ask that others often ask. What happens if we don't make 20%? You're going to come back and beat us up? No. As long as you're still walking forward and trying to save energy and still in the program, we're going to work with you. The city of Northampton will never make their 20% because they had done a ton of work on their own before we even got there in terms of making their buildings all energy efficient. And now they're just trying to do really difficult, small incremental changes, because the easy stuff, replacing light bulbs, they had already done all that. So they may never make their 20%. Other towns, the town of Beckett, they have 3 buildings or 4. Their initial grant, they got to 20% because they hadn't done much, and the grant paid for some insulation and some heating in a couple of buildings, and they saved 20% right away.
So, just so I can explain,
Sure.
understand it, if you don't reach your 20%, right, how does that affect what you get for grants and stuff, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, it doesn't. So again, if you don't get your 20% and after 5 years, but you're still walking forward, you're still eligible for grants.
So it doesn't affect it at all?
No. So in the beginning, there was some concern about, well, what happens if we don't meet the 20%? I said, in the first year, we weren't sure what the right answer was, and the more we thought it was, it's quite possible that you won't. And what are we going to penalize you? We're going to come take the insulation out of the house? No, as long as you're trying to, you could at any time just stop working with us, right? You could do some work, get a grant, get a second grant, say, yeah, we're done, thank you, and just kind of, you could even choose, people have asked this question before, you said that the stretch code changed and the standard building code changed. What if in 3 years the stretch code becomes really bizarre again, it becomes a big stretch? What if they require zero energy homes or solar panels? And the answer to that is you can unadopt the stretch code whenever you want, just like you adopted it. So you could get in the program, start spending some money. If they make some wild changes in the future, you can say, you know what, we're done, thank you very much, and keep what you've done and that go forward. I don't anticipate that happening, but you do have that option.
Well, some towns get more grant money than others. Can you just explain why that is, or how
Sure.
it works?
Yeah, so the very first grant, every town gets a minimum of $125,000. And then it's per capita, by population, how much more you get on the initial grant. So small towns get less money than bigger towns. So the original grant could be 125, 135, 145, 350, 400,000. After that initial grant is done, which is basically a gimme based on a math formula, you meet the 5 criteria, here's your first grant. Once that's spent, you're eligible, everyone's eligible, who's in the Green Communities Program and has spent the previous grant, finish what's on your plate before you ask for more, finish off one grant, you can apply for up to $250,000 for another grant. And when that's gone, you can apply for another, up to $250,000 for another grant. So some small towns have got $250,000 multiple times, which is the same as what a big city would get, $250,000 a year, multiple times. The first one is population-based. Beyond that, it becomes energy efficient-based. So if you put in a grant with the 3 or 4 projects on it, and you put in a grant with 3 or 4 projects on it, and we don't have enough money to fund everything, and you've got a project that's really not too good, we might not fund all 3 of your projects because they're not, and I can give you an example. In my town, Belchtown, after we got the first grant, we weren't sure what to do next, and someone said, we should put solar panels, solar hot water panels on the school to heat the water to make the swimming pool warm because, the swimming pool's cold. And so they got an estimate to do that. It would save money. But the money that was saved on a yearly basis, if you figure out how much it cost you to do the thing, it was a 90-year payback. And the equipment was not going to last 90 years, so we had to say no. Boston said no. So what I tell people on the competitive grants in the future is, first of all, chat with me, which they didn't, and let's put in 2 or 3 projects on the list. Maybe you ought to get one of them because one of them would be pretty good. And the information for good projects come from the energy audit you're going to do in your designation application.
Something else that you didn't mention, I just want to mention to the audience that solar panels, if you need a HERS rating of say 55, you have to be at 57, but you put solar panels on your house, they deduct 2 points for that, so you would hit the 50.
You get bonus points for solar panels or solar hot water, solar electricity, air source heat pumps.
And the present code, not the stretch code, but the present code, so you can compare it, it requires you to have solar ready. You have to give me the paperwork that shows that the house is solar ready. You don't have to do it, but you have to show it.
Right.
With the regular code, I'm saying.
Yeah, the standard code says, on your drawing of the roof, show me where the solar panels are likely to go and where the wiring might go. You're not required to put them on the roof. You're not required to put an empty container for the cables, but you are required to at least consider it in terms of north and south, trees or not trees. Basically, it's asking developers and builders to at least consider the future of getting solar panels on it, rather than build it completely in the wrong direction or with pipes sticking out of all the roofs and then there's no place to put the solar. They're asking you to think ahead a bit and do it.
So if the town approves this on our annual town meeting, June 4th, how soon can the town expect the money? That's the first part of my question.
Sure.
Then I have a second part.
Yeah. So the timing of the scheme, the timing of the whole process is, in October, we invite applications for new green communities. We get, last year we had the 25 new ones. In December is when we made the announcement, here's the people that made the grade, and here's the dollar amount they got based on the math that we did. We invite those towns to then apply for using that money for specific items. So we don't just give you the money and say, spend it on something in your plan. We want you to say, on our plan, we said we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We plan on doing line item 1 and line item 4. The technical review team looks at it to say, yes, this really is a valid program process. We say, yes, go move forward on these projects. That happens in January, February timeframe. That you apply to us asking for the money. We say yes, no, follow-up questions. Eventually, so I'm trying to think of when the earliest, so last October, the earliest, people are now beginning to put shovels in the ground to do the work. And the money's, when you get a contract with us to get the money and do the work, we give you 25% up front when we sign the contract, and then 50% of the contract when that first 25% is spent. But the final 25% happens after it's completely done and inspected. When that's all done, so we're looking at probably next summer, you would start to do projects. What we try to time it so you can get some stuff done in school when the kids aren't there.
So my follow-up question is to Mr. Gomon. Is there any warrant articles for energy efficiency in this year's warrant
No.
that can wait until, like, if we approve the stretch code, you know what I mean? Is there anything that can be put off until we can use the money from this grant versus taxpayers?
Great question.
Yeah, the answer to that question is no, and there's a lot of public policy questions that we will have to deal with if we do end up becoming a green community. One is who's going to make the determination as to which projects move forward, and so on and so forth. Some communities might leave it to the selectmen, some might leave it to a facilities committee, or some communities may even establish a sustainability community committee or something along those lines to help guide the process of moving forward. There's nothing necessarily on our warrant this year that we could use, that we should be holding off on, with the understanding that we might be getting these fundings. However, there might be some projects on the hopper. I mean, some of the low-hanging fruit would be lighting, moving to LED lighting in our buildings or on our streets, for example. Some of it might be, we've talked about replacing the HVAC systems at the library, at the town hall, at the center office building. Maybe we could use some of our grant monies to kind of bring in some of those new, better energy efficient systems. These are things that are on our long-range capital plan, maybe next 3 to 5 years, that we could easily identify as low-hanging fruit. But if you think of all of our municipal buildings, including Burgess Elementary School, by the way, and I know that Selectman Kabinski raised a very good question, public policy issue that still needs to be determined, but I was going to recommend the approach of bringing on all of our municipal buildings, including Burgess, and then holding off on looking at Tantascwa for a future date. Those are public policy issues not yet to be determined, but definitely something that we could find some good use for if we get an initial grant of close to $200,000 and ongoing grants moving forward. Thank you.
One more question, electric cars, how does that go with that, us being a tourist community, and I see electric cars, and it would be important to us in stations, electric charging station? Would that be anything that would fall under grants? I'm just...
Yes, so and thank you for raising that question, because I always saw energy efficiency, because to me, the negawatt is more important than the megawatt, turn the damn lights off for crying out loud. But yes, the Green Communities program allows for you to use some grant money for solar PV on a roof, for instance, but only the designation grant, the first grant. The competitive grant allows for purchasing of electric vehicles and charging stations. I think the last grant that we did, so we do the designation applications in October, and then in March we do the competitive grants, so that we don't have everything all done in 1 month. We get one thing behind us and we start doing the next thing. The last competitive grant application, I think we paid 100% for EVSEs, electric vehicle service equipment, which is charging stations. Mm-hmm. We pay the delta. We have been paying the delta between a Ford Fusion car and a Ford Fusion plug-in hybrid. Some small towns are using those for police vehicles. They're not really a chase vehicle, but some towns have used them for administrative purposes. So instead of having a gas vehicle that they're going to spend $30,000 on, they get the $45,000 version of it, which is a plug-in electric one. We pay the difference, so you're still only paying the $30,000, but you get the savings of gas and the charging station to plug it in. So those are kinds of things that are covered under the grant, yes.
Good. Thank you.
If there's nothing else, I'll say thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you all get a copy of the